From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. Out of Oklahoma State University, Derrell has this week's insight on the cattle markets. Derrell will look ahead to what he considers the most pivotal factors for the markets in 2020, and he has some advice for you cow-calf producers in as far as looking back on this past production year to identify where you could make economic improvements in your operation this year. Then K-State's Mike Sanderson and Juergen Richt will talk about their new research initiatives on contending with foot and mouth disease on two fronts, and they'll explain. Later on then, with this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talking with K-State's Beth Hinshaw and Dona Ratliff about 4-H citizenship in action. That and more ahead on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Thanks once more for joining us for Agriculture Today. We will take up the cattle markets to get this Monday edition rolling, and with the good help of our guest from Stillwater, Oklahoma, livestock economist, Oklahoma State University, Derrell. Well, Derrell, we have a number of things that you've put together in article form here at the end of 2019 and the early part of 2020. We want to venture into those in just a second, but to put it succinctly, as we've started this new year, the cattle markets seem to be in a good spot right now.
You know, they really do, and oftentimes January, it takes a little while to kind of really figure out what the new tone of the market is, and it can change, significantly just by virtue of turning the calendar page. But so far, cash markets, both fed cattle and feeder cattle, the futures markets, everything has been, pretty positive here so far. So we're really starting off on a good, strong note.
What would you single out as the most enthusing thing about the markets right now?
Well, I think we're carrying a lot of momentum from the last part of 2019, and so, that's probably as much as anything right now. It's still early, I think, to have a sense of kind of where we are, and from a meat standpoint and the post-holiday assessment, again, that usually takes about the first half of January, at least, to get to that. The fundamentals are, really in pretty good shape as we go forward, and I think the market's already reacting to that.
And in fact, you have authored this article on the factors to watch as we push forward into the new calendar year, 2020. We want to talk about that, but before we look ahead, let's glance back a bit. For you put together another article recently for the cow-calf producer, and you're asking those producers to take stock of what 2019 was all about as they prepare for this new year. So there are a number of things you think that producers can gain from this past year's experience?
We don't do it every day, and that's probably, a wise thing. But I think it's good once in a while. Maybe the end of the year is a good time to sort of look back and really kind of assess last year, what happened, why it happened, and, think about how that might tell you something about management changes and management approaches that you might want to think about in the future. So 2019, I think, was kind of a little bit of something for everyone. We had some struggles, certainly at the cow-calf and the feeder cattle market side. We had some challenges with market volatility. We had a number of things going on, but it comes down to looking back at managing costs and really taking stock of how we can prepare ourselves to deal with those kinds of challenges in the market when they arise.
You've broken this out into 3 broad categories: production, inputs, and marketing. On that production side, you ask the producer to ponder several questions as to the productivity of their breeding herds.
I think it's good to look at those. We use a variety of sort of technical measures, if you will, to assess that. But it comes down to, really trying to disaggregate, where you're at production-wise. And so you can look at an overall number and say, well, how many calves did I sell? And, of course, the market side of it is what did I get for those calves? But from a production standpoint, do you really know, where you're at with that calf crop percentage? If it's not where, and what's a good benchmark that you should be using to measure against that? And then go back and dissect that a little bit and think about, did I have problems with calf mortality prior to weaning, or prior to that, did I not get as many calves born as I would have, liked, again, by some reasonable measure, or, go back to the previous year and look at, pregnancy rates and try to figure out, reproductive-wise, nutrition-wise, what factors are really limiting production, and is there a reason to make some changes?
Now, interlaced with that input management, of course, and you pose the basic question that producers should have their arms around, and that is, what is the annual cost per cow? Actually citing some work out of K-State on that score.
That's right, and and I focused a lot in those comments on the forage side, because we often tell cattle producers, you're not really in the cattle business, you're in the forage business. You raise forage of one kind or another. You're trying to find a way to market and to harvest and market that forage, and of course we do that primarily with grazing cattle. But really understanding that cost of production, probably the biggest variable that we see in the cattle industry is the range of cost of production across cow-calf operations. And again, it's, a lot of producers just sort of say, well, whatever happened, but it really isn't that. That's the one area you really do control, as opposed to markets and weather and some other things that impact your business. And so it's worth spending a little bit of time to really understand grazing management and maximizing the use of your grazable forages, using supplemental feeds and harvested forages when you need to, and just think about the cost of those things and opportunities that you might have to improve returns by managing cost, as opposed to expecting the market to offer you more returns.
And what about the marketing side of that equation, Derrell? You get into the value of value added, to put it that way, right?
Well, again, markets overall, we can't do a lot about. Markets go up and down for a broad set of reasons, and a producer can't impact that. However, you can often impact sort of your position in that market in a couple of different ways. One of them is at the cow-calf level, by thinking about these value-added kinds of things that I presume, well, I hope most producers are doing, and yet we see lots of evidence that there's still progress to be made in terms of basic production practices, castrating calves, vaccinating. Preconditioning is the package that we put them into, and we do know, and we have lots of data to support the idea that preconditioning does pay the majority of the time, particularly if you work at it a little bit, not only to do those things, but also to market for added value. The other part of it is risk management in terms of sort of how and when you price those cattle. And so there are ways to, you can't change the overall market level, but you can change the timing of when you set your value in the marketplace through contracting, perhaps with futures and hedging, those kind of tools. They're all worth looking at to see if there are opportunities there that will help you in terms of overall revenue management as well as risk management.
Well, cow-calf producers, we're not too deep into the new year that you can't go back and reflect on those things in 2019 as a possible baseline for improvements here in 2020. And speaking of which, you recently put this article out, Cattle Market Factors to Watch here in 2020 overall. Well, there's quite a collection of things here that producers should stay on top of, Derrell.
Well, there is. I mean, we have sort of the usual list of factors, and we can talk about all of them, but at any one time, oftentimes we're focusing on one more than the other. Most of 2019, with all of the challenges that we did have, but I still would describe it as a situation where we were largely in balance between supply and demand. We've been in cyclical expansion for a number of years. We think that's about at a maximum right now. So we're not going to see a lot of additional supply pressure. Beef production will be a little bit higher in 2020. But overall, it actually starts to stabilize and reduces that part of it. So we've got to watch other factors. On the demand side, we're going to watch total meat supplies. We're going to watch this broader trade picture as a component of beef demand. and, of course, the macroeconomy and all those external big picture factors that can impact demand. Energy prices could jump up here. We've had some recent concerns and some geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, and those kind of things can impact energy values and currency values. It's those kinds of factors that we're really keeping an eye on, probably more so than other factors.
The beef export potential, that's one of the things that you keyed on in the article here as well, with the pending agreement with Canada and Mexico, getting that finalized. Likewise with China, the African swine fever factor. There's a lot in play here, Derrell.
There really is. We've been through an awful lot of turmoil with the trade situation over the last couple of years, and we really began to see that clarified just a little bit at the end of 2019. I wouldn't say we're out of the woods yet. There's a number of things yet to go, but we do look like we're on the verge of removing the uncertainty of the new NAFTA version, the USMCA. We have a new agreement bilaterally with Japan, which is going to help us get back to a more competitive position in that market. We think we're on the verge here of signing a partial trade deal with China and begin to sort of unwind some of the things that have been hindering those markets. So for all of those reasons, the overall trade picture for beef and for meats in general looks pretty positive. And of course, the newest factor that really is a big factor to keep an eye on in 2020, and that is this African swine fever thing. We literally have lost about 20 to 30% of the hogs on the planet in the last year to this disease. And, that affects pork markets first and foremost, but it really affects all protein markets because there's simply less meat on the planet now than there was, and that's going to be supportive of these markets as we go through certainly 2020 and probably sometime beyond that.
So in the main, there are solid reasons for at least guarded optimism, if nothing else, in the beef cattle sector in this next calendar year, it sounds.
I agree. I think it's definitely looking a little more positive this year. I'm not overly bullish, I guess, maybe compared to some people, but I think the overall situation is very supportive. More so, I do expect modestly higher prices, particularly in the second half of 2020 relative to what we went through in 2019. And again, I think there's still plenty of potential for volatility, but arguably perhaps a little bit less than what we've been dealing with for many months over the last year or two.
Very well. Always a pleasure to visit with you and get your thoughts on these trades, especially as now we're heading into this brand new calendar year. And Derrell, we'll catch up with you again soon. Many thanks.
Sounds good. You bet.
He's Derrell Peel, livestock economist, Oklahoma State University. Agriculture Today will be back on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Welcome back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Well, a pair of veterinarians out of Kansas State University will be spearheading highly important work on two fronts, but addressing the same huge livestock disease concern. Some steps will be made through research to know what to do if, in fact, it becomes an earnest threat, and that is foot and mouth disease. Joining us now from the College of Veterinary Medicine at K-State, Mike Sanderson. Mike is the Associate Director of the University's Center for Outcomes Research and Epidemiology, and Juergen Richt, who's with us as well. Juergen is the director of the Center of Excellence for Emerging and Zoonotic Animal Diseases here at Kansas State University. Each of them were the recipients of new grants from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and its Agricultural Research Service to address FMD. Well, we'll ask either or both of you to comment, first of all, on the seriousness of the foot and mouth disease issue to the livestock sector. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, we haven't had foot and mouth disease in this country since 1929, and so our livestock animals are completely naive to the virus. So if it was introduced, everyone would be susceptible. We would expect that it would probably spread fairly widely throughout the country. Early detection and being able to respond correctly would be very important in bringing it under control as quickly as possible. From an economic standpoint, we'd lose export markets, would be a huge economic impact on our livestock industries.
Now, we're talking multiple species vulnerable to FMD.
Certainly swine, ruminants, sheep, goats, and cattle would all be very susceptible.
Before we talk specifically about the details of your respective projects, Juergen, how prepared at the moment are the livestock sectors for FMD, in your view?
We are dealing constantly with threats of foreign animal diseases for our livestock industries. And one threat is foot-and-mouth disease, and the other threat, which we talk almost daily about, is African swine fever, and other is maybe classical swine fever. So the livestock sector is very aware of the epidemiology, where these diseases are present at the moment, where they are, where animals which are sick and spreading these viruses. And so we have a pretty good risk awareness of products, etc., from these different regions. And so I think from that aspect, we are pretty well prepared. What we will discuss in a minute are mitigation strategies. If this disease, like foot-and-mouth disease, will ever come to our shores, we need to have mitigation strategy in place. And two very important mitigation strategies are one, which are already mentioned by Dr. Sanderson, is diagnostics. Sensitive, specific diagnostics, and we do have that in place for foot-and-mouth disease. And second are vaccines. And that's the problem we have with foot-and-mouth disease. And that's why we work with Plum Island to develop better vaccines for foot-and-mouth disease. The rationale or the reason is that foot-and-mouth disease comes in various codes, serotypes. We have 7 different serotypes. And within these serotypes, we have different genetic lineages. They call it topotypes. And so if we have a vaccine against serotype A, and we have a lot of these serotype A vaccine, and a serotype O comes into the country, a vaccine made against serotype A will not help against O, and vice versa. And then even within one serotype, say serotype O, the most prevalent serotype in the world, they are different in different areas in the world, in different topographic regions in the world are different genetic lineages. And in most cases, a serotype O virus, say from Asia, might not cross-protect against the serotype O virus from South America. And so we cannot store 20 different vaccines for 200 million animals.
We'll stay on this for the moment. Is this the basic objective of your research, Juergen, to try to come up with a universal vaccine that will cover all of these variations of FMD?
So right now, our vaccine bank, which we have in the United States and which just got a pretty big infusion, monetary infusion to make it bigger, covering more serotype topotypes. And so the holy grail for foot-and-mouth disease vaccination, like other diseases, for example, influenza, same concept, is to have a more universal vaccine available, which will cover many more topotype and serotypes. And that's the basis of the work we do with Plum Island.
And before we bring Mike in to talk about his aspect, are there vaccine candidates out there already, formulations that could serve the purpose that you're talking about here?
None of the vaccines which are conditionally or fully licensed offer a universal vaccine concept. There is a more modern vaccine which is conditionally licensed in the United States, and it's based on a adenovirus, a vector-based vaccine, and this is a human adenovirus which doesn't replicate well in cattle, but enough, or in pigs or other small ruminants, but it replicates enough to deliver the load it carries, which is the capsid proteins of foot-and-mouth disease, the critical proteins which induce neutralizing antibodies, and in order that these animals which are vaccinated with these recombinant adenovirus to produce neutralizing antibodies and be protected. But none of these offer the universal vaccine concept we just described, and which is obviously one of the goals of foot-and-mouth disease vaccine researchers, to produce such a more widely broadly protective vaccine formulation.
So that is the objective of your research. Once again, to note the USDA supporting this with 2 USDA ARS grants totaling nearly $450,000. Mike, again, you'll be looking at modeling, as they put it, foot and mouth disease outbreaks to get an idea of how those would actually take place across the countryside and therefore give a better idea of developing response mechanisms?
Yes, that's correct. So we'll use, obviously you can't turn foot and mouth disease loose in the country and, see how it happens and what's the best way to control it. So we try to do that in a computer using mathematical models. So we have mathematics that describe the probability that transmission happens from one herd to another, and we'll model that throughout the country. So as we introduce FMD in different species and in different areas of the country, we can then model the progression of the disease and what happens, including different ways to try to intervene and control the disease. One of the very important ones is vaccination. If we are able to vaccinate the livestock industry, how effective is that, and what's the best method to do so? So assuming Dr. Wright can come up with this vaccine, that would be a hugely valuable thing. Hopefully we'll be able to identify what's the best way to implement it in terms of who to vaccinate and when and how much vaccine do we need in order to try to control an outbreak. We'll look at some other issues as well, including diagnostics, how quickly we make that diagnosis, and what other control options we may implement to try to control disease.
And when we think of controlling something as aggressive as foot and mouth, we're looking at a whole spectrum of things, quarantine protocols, et cetera, et cetera. Is that right?
Exactly. So quarantine, movement controls, biosecurity measures, all those sorts of things. You had brought up preparedness earlier, and certainly there's been a lot of work go into that. The secure food supply plans for pork and for beef and for milk in particular in relation to foot and mouth disease have worked through a lot of those issues in terms of what would work for the industry to try to control disease and at the same time allow as much continuity of business as possible. So we'll be accounting for those sorts of things and how we may be able to control it, as well as looking at things like vaccination.
Well, again, to outline for the listeners, these are separate, independent projects addressing the same disease issue from a couple of perspectives. So in closing here, the both of you have pretty high hopes for what you're embarking on here in regard to the respective objectives of your projects. Is that fair to say, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think both of them have the potential to provide some really valuable insights.
Juergen?
It's obviously this is a high-hanging fruit, obviously, to get a universal vaccine, and collaboration with Plum Island on something like that is very important. I have to mention, at Kansas State, we are not using any infectious foot and mouth disease virus. So all of this work, at least the work in animals with infectious foot and mouth disease virus, is done in Plum Island with our collaborators there to study the efficacy, etc., of the constructs we are developing.
Yeah, important reassurance there for sure.
Yes, and we're only working with pretend virus in a computer.
That's right.
And that's very important.
We wish the both of you all the best in these pursuits, given the gravity of foot and mouth disease. Even though it hasn't been here for decades, we do not care to see its return. Thanks to the both of you for joining us and telling us about your respective projects. Over from the College of Veterinary Medicine at Kansas State University, Juergen Richt and Mike Sanderson. Again, their work on the strength of grants being provided by the USDA's Agricultural Research Service, recently announced. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back in a moment.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here, and with today's agricultural news headlines, briefly now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, President Donald Trump injected a little uncertainty into the situation relative to the Phase 1 agreement with China, telling a television station in Ohio last week that the deal will be signed this Wednesday, January 15th, or perhaps shortly thereafter. There was no clarification from the White House, the comment coming after China had confirmed that Vice Premier Liu He would be leading the delegation to Washington this week to sign the deal. As for Phase 2, the president reiterated last week that he could wait until after the 2020 election to reach the Phase 2 accord with China. He said he thinks he could get a better deal if he waits until after his November re-election bid. The president said his administration will start right away negotiating that next piece of the agreement after striking the Phase 1 deal, but he said, quoting here, it will take a little time to finish a Phase 2 accord, and suggested he could have more leverage after his re-election bid in November. That USDA January crop production report issued last Friday morning was mostly as expected, except for some numbers with corn. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
What was one unexpected result of the latest USDA crop report?
There weren't any big surprises this month, with a little bit of an exception for the corn balance sheet, where NASS went back and revised last year's production and stocks estimates a fair amount.
That was Acting World Ag Outlook Board Chair Mark Jekanowski.
The biggest change for last year's balance sheet for the 2018 crop was a downward revision in production and a increase in ending stocks.
This also led to a little higher carry-in than was expected.
And that combined with, NASA also increased their production estimate for corn modestly this month as well. So between the higher beginning stocks and the modest increase in production, based mostly on a higher yield estimate, that led to a fairly large increase in total supply.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
How about the Kansas numbers then from the 2019 crop production summary? Well, corn in the state estimated at a record high 801 million bushels. That was up 25% from 2018, according to the USDA. A yield of 133 bushels per acre, up 4 bushels from the previous year. The corn acreage harvested 6.02 million acres, up 21% from 2018. Grain sorghum production in Kansas this past year estimated at 204 million bushels, down 13% from 18. The yield at 85 bushels per, down 3 bushels from a year earlier, and grain sorghum harvested acreage at 2.4 million acres, down 9% from 2018. Soybean production in the state this last year, 186 million bushels, down 8% from 2018, with a yield of 41.5 bushels per acre, down a bushel and a half from the year earlier. The soybean acreage harvested 4.49 million acres, down 4% from 2018. Other notes from that summary, alfalfa hay production in Kansas was at 2.52 million tons, up 18% from 18, with a yield of 4 tons per acre, up a half a ton from 2018. All other hay production at 3.8 million tons, up 45% from 2018, with a record high yield of 2.3 tons per acre. That's up 0.8 of a ton per acre from 2018. Sunflower, oil sunflowers, that is, a record low 44.8 million pounds, down 27% from 2018. Canola production in Kansas at 20.7 million pounds, down 38% from the previous year. And cotton production in the state in 2019, 298,000 bales, down 15% from 2018. And winter wheat seeded in Kansas for 2020 production, estimated at 6.9 million acres, according to the USDA. That was equal to last year's seeded area of 6.9 million acres. Canola seeded area at 15,000 acres. That's down from last year's seeded area of 29,000 acres in Kansas. A quick reminder for you here, the 17th annual Cover Your Acres Winter Conference is all set for the next 2 days, the 14th and 15th, at the Gateway Civic Center in Oberlin, a joint venture from K-State Research and Extension and the conference sponsors. Same program offered both days of the conference. Registration $65 per day, and that'll include lunch, morning, afternoon refreshments, educational materials, and so forth. If you'd like to know more information at this late hour, you can still find out more at northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres. northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres. Now, this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Ryan Armbruster. Ryan?
Like many of you, I stave off the chills of winter by heating my home, in part, with firewood. In my opinion, there's just nothing like wood heat, whether it's from a traditional open fireplace, a potbelly stove, or a modern forced air wood stove. But heating with wood invariably means that firewood will come into the house, and with firewood often comes insect passengers. Firewood is often harvested from trees that are declining or past their prime, as we usually don't choose vigorous, healthy trees in the woods when we're cutting for firewood. Native borers are often found in these declining trees, doing their job of accelerating the carbon cycle in the woods. Many of these borers will overwinter in the tree, waiting until warm spring weather to emerge. When we cut down those trees and bring them into our warm homes as firewood, we occasionally fool those borers into emerging early, and we have unexpected insect guests in our homes. Fortunately for us, those borers pose no threat to us or to anything in our homes. Common firewood insects such as the red-headed ash borer, painted hickory borer, or the locust borer may seem intimidating at first, as they mimic wasps with their yellow banded appearance. They are beetles, not wasps, and as such cannot sting us. Firewood that is stored for longer periods of time may occasionally have powder post beetles in it, and these beetles are a risk for unfinished solid wood products in the home, but you can limit the risk by not storing firewood indoors for more than a couple days. And while native borers can be a harmless nuisance in the home, we need to remember that firewood can also contain much more serious threats, such as the emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetles, walnut twig beetles, and more. So it's best to avoid moving firewood long distances to limit the chances of also moving threats to our woodlands and trees. I'm Ryan Armbruster, Forest Health Specialist with the Kansas Forest Service, and this has been another Tree Tale.
All right, Ryan, many thanks. Jeff Wickman awaits with this week's 4-H segment. That's next on Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. The Kansas Legislature is beginning its 2020 session today, and Kansas youth will soon have an opportunity through Kansas 4-H to participate in the annual Citizenship in Action February 16th and 17th at the state capitol in Topeka. However, as Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw and 4-H Program Coordinator Dona Ratliff point out, the deadline to register for the two-day event is rapidly approaching. Beth, what is it that everyone needs to know? Why is this an important thing for the youth to be involved with?
Well, I think, first of all, if we think back, to the bigger objectives of 4-H youth development, growing healthy citizens is one of the things that we've been about for a long time. Some of the research that's been done about 4-H even goes as far to talk about some of the differences in 4-H members, and that is that they are much more likely to make a contribution to their community. And so I think that kind of undergirds what we think about with citizenship. And so, being able to be in Topeka and, be in the capital and do all those kinds of things and, make a difference in the future, those are things that we want young people to experience now so that they're going to continue doing it.
And really being able to understand the legislative process, because that in itself is something that most people aren't familiar with.
That's exactly right. And we have really a special thing that we'll be doing this year with Laya Mistrovich C. is one of our state specialists, and she's been working with a department on campus. And we will be working with the young people at Citizenship in Action, where we're teaching them about how they can affect the legislative process, how to have those tough conversations on societal topics that are impacting the world today, and then learn to put in the practice the principles of civic discourse, deliberation, and skills, and then how to find common ground. You know, communication is another one of those really bedrock things that we're about in Kansas 4-H, and so we just love this opportunity that we're going to have to help young people improve their communication skills that in turn will improve their communities.
And Donna, the youth are going to have an opportunity to do a lot of things over this 2-day time frame.
Absolutely. They have a chance to tour the Capitol and get an idea of what it is to be in the Capitol when there's legislators in session or anything like that. They also have a chance to possibly meet with their legislators if they reach out and set up an appointment prior to the event. And so that's a great option for them as well, to have that time to actually interact with their legislators.
Also have a dinner, a dance, and a lot of opportunities to just kind of network.
Exactly. There's just time for them to be themselves as well, with peers that are, same ages and same situations in life, and get to know others throughout the state.
This is something that they've done every year, Beth. In terms of the registration process, what are some of the things that they need to know that they can get registered by this Wednesday?
Well, we always suggest that people go to our website, which is www.kansas4h.org, and there's information about Citizenship in Action under the events and activities. It's open to any youth who are 13 to 18, and that's as of January 1 of 2020. 4-H membership is not required, so if somebody has a friend that they feel like this would be a great experience, we hope they'll encourage them to register as well.
What are some of the things that they need to keep in mind as they go through this process? What should they be thinking about in terms of the things they want to talk to their legislators about, things they want to learn? What should they do in advance?
We'll be providing some information to them about how to reach out to their legislators. I think it's important for them to think about, what is it that they care about? What kinds of things are happening in their community or in the state of Kansas that they are concerned about or that they would like to learn more about. Our legislators that have been a part of Citizenship in Action with us and that our young people have met with in the past have been very interested in what are the issues that young people are concerned about. So we just really want young people to talk about the things that they are concerned about. Don't worry about what you think you should be interested in. What is the issue that you're concerned about?
And they need to have a chaperone, or at least their group needs to have a chaperone?
Yes, as with all Kansas 4-H events, it's our volunteers and staff that make it possible for us to do these things, and so they will need to have a chaperone, and usually those are assigned through the local extension unit.
And there is a cost associated with this, and this is, again, something that might be able to be worked out within the group?
Definitely. The registration is $200 per person, and that includes, their lodging, the banquet, the meals, transportation to the Capitol and back on Monday. And so there's a number of our local units who have scholarships available for that as well. And so we just encourage everybody to look into what all their opportunities are locally.
Also want them to think about attire and being more of a business trip in a sense.
That's very true. The attire for this one is a little different than probably what they're used to. This is a very professional look for this situation. You're meeting with your legislators, so we definitely want them to consider business attire such as jackets, business suits, anything along those lines. Jeans are definitely not appropriate, and no tennis shoes or things like that.
This is an interesting trip because not only do they get to meet with the legislators, they're going to also have a chance to tour the Capitol and see things that maybe some people don't always get to see, and a chance, as you mentioned, Beth, to really get that citizenship in action.
Most definitely. And what we hear from past members who've been at Citizenship in Action is, it really was a really great opportunity for them to really go a lot more in depth with meeting their legislator and a lot more in depth with the Capitol. There's been some really wonderful recent transformation at the Capitol, there's a museum there by the Visitor Center and just lots of restoration that's happened. And, it's such a historic building for young people to be in also. So it's just, I think overall it is just a really wonderful opportunity.
And as you mentioned, all the information is available on the website, but they really need to check it out quickly and get registered this week.
That's right. Our deadline for registration is the 15th of January.
That's Kansas 4-H Program Coordinator Dona Ratliff and Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw discussing Citizenship in Action, which helps Kansas youth learn how the state legislative process works and how their participation in decision-making can make a difference in their communities. Again, for more information, go to kansas4h.org. Again, the registration deadline is this Wednesday. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.